This is Newsroom. Hello and welcome from Johannesburg here in South Africa. As always, I'm Eben Jansen. The show is live. It's broadcast from our studios here in Auckland Park. We're also streaming live on YouTube right now, where the whole show is always available on demand on our YouTube channel. Now today, we look at a report by the University of the Free State to Africa battles with civil disobedience and protests. We get an update from the official funeral of anti-apartheid activist Reverend SABC. We look at escalating violence ahead of Nigeria's elections. Then hijackings have been causing a stir on social media here in Johannesburg. And we close by looking at a unique app. It's a travel app that will make you pay next to nothing to contact family and friends while you're overseas. But first, let's get the day's news from Katrine Miller.
Well, hello and welcome to Newsroom. I'm Katrine Miller, and let's just take a look at those top stories this morning. A 30-year-old Gugulethu man believed to be linked to a series of rapes and murders in the Cape Peninsula is due to appear in the Goodwood Magistrates Court today. This after the bodies of several women were found near Century City train station last year. Police are investigating a possible link with all the bodies. The bodies of 6 women have been discovered separately in the area over the past few months, leading to fears about a serial killer operating in the area. Most of the bodies were found naked with their hands tied behind their backs. Dozens of people, including politicians and church leaders, are expected to attend the funeral of veteran anti-apartheid activist Reverend SABC in Port Elizabeth today. Mkhundu died of pneumonia last week, aged 18. President Jacob Zuma has granted him a special provincial funeral. In Pretoria, a memorial service will be held for late former National Police Commissioner Jackie Selebi. A series of high-profile mourners, including local politicians, are expected to attend. The 64-year-old Selebi died at the Steve Biko Academic Hospital in Pretoria last week. He was on medical parole at the time of his death after he was convicted of corruption in 2010. The memorial will be held at the Event Centre in Pretoria West at 5 o'clock this afternoon. A campaign against militant group Boko Haram is expected to come under the spotlight in the next 3 days as African heads of state meet in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. The African Union's Peace and Security Council is to discuss deployment of possible regional force against Boko Haram. The militants have killed hundreds of people, displaced thousands, and destroyed villages and towns in northeastern Nigeria. Meanwhile, back home, government has warned that all South Africans who are illegally engaged in military operations in Nigeria will be arrested. Newspapers have reported that some former South African soldiers are training Nigerian troops to fight Boko Haram. Speaking on the sidelines of the AU summit, Defence Minister Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula says all mercenaries will be severely dealt with.
Our government is not in Nigeria. Our government has not made a statement about going in and fight Boko Haram. There is no war we are involved in. What we are involved in is a process of neutralizing the negative forces which was agreed upon by heads of state when we, in the first instance, deployed the FIB.
Problems affecting the Hawks, including the suspension of its head, will be highlighted when Parliament's Oversight Committee on Police Grill's Minister Nathi Nhleko today. Last week, Nhleko filed an appeal after the North Gauteng High Court ruled that Hawks boss Anwar Dramat's suspension was invalid. The elite unit's Gauteng head Shadrack Sibia is also under suspension. And Hashim Amla and Riley Rousseau smashed quick-fire centuries as South Africa crushed the West Indies by 131 runs in a rain-affected 5th and final one-day international. The match was reduced to 42 overs because of rain, and South Africa scored a massive 361 for 5. The pair put on 247 for the 3rd wicket, equaling the South African record they had set in the second match of the series. Well, remember, all those top stories and more are all available on our Newsroom Facebook page. You can then also keep up to date on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Evan, back to you.
Thank you very much. South Africa has been dubbed the protest capital of the world, with one of the highest rates of public protests and civil disobedience around. The rate of protests has even escalated since 2004. In February 2014, it was reported that there had been nearly 3,000 protest actions in the last 90 days. That was more than 30 a day at the time, involving more than 1 million people. In the run-up to last year's election, more service delivery protests were recorded, and after the election, everything seemed to die down. A recent study by the University of Free State's researcher Dr. Setulego Matebesi cited maladministration, poverty and a lack of accountability as some of the reasons for the sharp increase in service delivery protests. The study covered mainly the Free State, North West and Northern Cape over a period of 10 years. Now, Dr. Matebesi joins us live from Bloemfontein. Very good morning to you, Matebesi. Dr. Matebesi, thank you for joining us.
Hi, good morning, Eben, from sunny Bloemfontein, and good morning to the viewers at home.
Dr. Matebesi, this is a very interesting report that you've compiled. Just take us through the study and the various fields that you covered.
Eben, if you look at the study, I think the rationale behind the study was actually to counterbalance the predominant focus on violent service delivery protests in our predominantly black communities in South Africa. And if you look at service delivery protests in South Africa, they do not just take place in predominantly black communities. White South Africans also do protest, but they protest by means of withholding rates and taxes. And if you look in the northwest, there's a small town called Sannieshof. I actually regard Sannieshof as the small town where white ratepayers have actually indicated how South Africans can go about. But the main rationale of the objective of the study is actually to see what lessons can we learn from the non-violent service delivery protest, which has been followed by ratepayer associations in South Africa. But once again, also, my focus was on 3 provinces in the country. The first province was the Free State, and the predominantly black community that I'm focusing on in the Free State, it is Ficksburg, the so-called Tatani situation. Yeah. And the ratepayer association that I'm focusing on, it's the Hillbron community. And as I've indicated, in Northwest, the predominantly white community, it is Sannieshof, and the predominantly black community, it is actually Khanyesa. And in Northern Cape, it is Kuruman, the so-called road, no school, no school protest there, and the white community, it is the R. So in a nutshell, that was actually the focus of my study.
I want to ask you, we see before the election last year a big spike in protest, and then after the election there was a big drop-off in protest. How much of these protests are politically motivated?
Eben and the viewers at home, I actually became involved in the service delivery protest since 2008, focusing on the Khutsong, the so-called cross-border municipality protest. But if you look at who are actually behind all these protests, it definitely points to that, it had to do with some of the leaders within political structures. And yes, definitely, I remember communities are using protest as bargaining power. And that is why we are still bound to see high levels of service delivery protests just 3 months before any elections, whether it's a national elections or any local government elections. But definitely communities do use elections as bargaining power.
I want to ask you then, within the kinds of civil disobedience that we've seen in the last week here around Gauteng, the looting of foreign-owned shops and so forth, how does this sit within the work that you do, and how do you view what's been going on the last week?
Well, by training, I am a sociologist, and any public violence definitely has something to do with sociology. But if you look at a situation with these xenophobic attacks, I think South Africa, we're still struggling with some structural problems such as poverty, unemployment, high levels of unemployment. And the problem is, if you've got a situation where the majority of your youth are affected, then definitely we are bound to see some of these xenophobic attacks against our foreigners continuing right through into the elections next year. But definitely, I mean, it's all the structural social problems that we currently encounter in South Africa that fuel some of these violent attacks against foreigners.
In conclusion, what are the recommendations, Doctor, that you put forward for us to alleviate the situation and move forward as South Africa?
If you look at the report, I think some of the structures that I still have to engage. I am engaging SALGA at both the South African Local Government Association, both at provincial in the 3 provinces that I conducted my study with. But I also intend to engage them at a national level. And lastly, I would also like to engage the presidency, because at the end of the day, I think for us as academics who are involved in this kind of research, and it will be a futile exercise if we don't take our recommendations to government. But one of the main recommendations is that we cannot afford a situation where we are now using schools as bargaining power. And perhaps that is one of the lessons that we have to learn. Because fact of the matter is, I have already made recommendations. 10 to 15 years from now, we are still bound to see the impact of what happened in Kuruman. And I also predicted last year that because people want to become instant heroes, copying what is happening in other communities. And I also predicted we are bound to see this whole tactic of using learners as bargaining power, that it will spread to other communities. And already it has started in what we currently see in what is happening in the province of Limpopo. Now recently in my hometown of Forismith, kids were also prevented to go to school, and I've also heard there's another community in Northwest. So these are serious, grave concerns that we as South Africans can never allow.
Doctor, I thank you for joining us today. That is Free State University researcher Dr. Setulego Matebesi, giving us an insight into civil disobedience and service delivery protest in particular here in South Africa. We move on. The human rights leader and prominent leader of his society, Reverend Canon Mcebisi Qundu, is being laid to rest today. The Eastern Cape government has worked together with President Jacob Zuma to give Reverend Qundu a special official provincial funeral. Qundu died of pneumonia early last week in Port Elizabeth at the age of 80. Many have come to pay their tributes to the fallen leader who played a huge role in the ANC and many organizations that were mainly aimed at bettering the lives of the poor. Now, our very own reporter, Iviwe Porti, is attending the service and joins us from Nongoza Jebe Hall in New Brighton in Port Elizabeth. A very good morning to you, Iviwe. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Eben, and welcome to Port Elizabeth.
Iviwe, I understand mourners have been arriving since quite early. Just give us the latest and then the expectation there today.
Eben, quite a few people have arrived while speaking to the organizers of the funeral. They're expecting about 3,000 people to come through. The hall only takes 2,000, so there is a marquee outside that will take over the overflow. The body just arrived. There are quite a few ministers that are here. The Secretary General of the ANC is also here attending today. So we have people from different walks of life. We have community leaders, community members, church leaders, church members, as well as our political leaders and people that lead the country as well. Thabo Mbeki, the former president, is also expected to come and attend the funeral. But right here now, Stone Sizani is also here, Lindiwe Sisulu is also here. There's quite a few of the ministers that are actually attending the funeral.
Can you tell us, Iviwe, for those who don't know, the background of Reverend Mcebisi Qundu and why he's receiving this official provincial funeral?
Well, if I can take you back a bit, he was born Engcobo in the Eastern Cape in 1934 on the 11th of June, and soon after that, around the 1950s, he joined the ANC Youth League, where he became the General Secretary of that region. He was part of the Defiance campaign. He was very forefront in the Release Mandela campaign. He also worked with Steve Biko on the Black Community Project, and he was also MC at his funeral. He was very prominent and forward about fighting for human rights and the freedom of South Africa, the freedom that we have now. But he never stopped after that. He became a minister in the 1960s. He became a priest in the 1960s. He worked through the church. He worked with the people. He's been behind building quite a few number of churches. He's been behind a lot of community projects. He was part of the reconciliation processes. He was part of the Eastern Cape Ministries Association. He was a man that really gave a lot of his life to the community.
And the official provincial funeral, what will that entail today? What will be the order of proceedings?
Well, early on this morning at 6 o'clock, the roads were closed. They've started at 9 o'clock. They started at 7 at the house. They've started now at 9 o'clock. There are quite some prominent people that are part of the program. There won't be any driving to the burial site because he has been cremated. So it should be over in about 2 hours. There's quite a few police officers on site as well. We have your ambulances on site as well. So that's what it entails. It will be a provincial funeral. The Premier is also expected to come through.
Well, Iviwe, thank you very much for that update. Coming to you live from the Nongoza Jebe Hall in New Brighton in Port Elizabeth, where the official funeral for Reverend Canon SABC will be taking place today. Now, in the Western Cape, Cape Town Mayor Patricia de Lille has described the conduct of some ANC members as disgraceful after a chaotic city meeting there last night. A motion to have Table Bay Boulevard renamed to the F.W. de Klerk Boulevard was approved last night by the DA-led council there. Meanwhile, the ANC in the DA-run Cape Town has threatened to approach the Public Protector's office to investigate the legitimacy of the City Council approval to rename Table Bay Boulevard after former President F.W. de Klerk.
We convened in another room and we had a full quorum. We were joined by 2 more opposition parties and we concluded the business of council because that was part of their tactics and strategy to prevent us from adopting the adjustment budget. So we've adopted the adjustment budget, the annual report. All the business of council has been concluded without the ANC.
We will write to the public protector around the process that was followed on public participation about F.W. de Klerk. That process was flawed. We made a point as African National Congress. The mayor was misleading the council here because the reason why they cut this debate, we were going to expose them in terms of the information on public participation.
Now, the renaming of Table Bay Boulevard, it's quite an emotive issue, not just in Cape Town, seems to be reverberating around the country. Let's just have a look at some of your views, what you've been saying around this issue. Of course, at SABC Newsroom is where you can interact with us, and these are some of it. Kanita Sami says, F.W. de Klerk Boulevard, we're going backwards, says Kanita. E. Daniel Kenya says, F.W. de Klerk, Nelson Mandela referred to him as head of an illegitimate, discredited minority regime. A position-led Cape Town honours him. Simon Williamson says the next high priority an SA government entity should tackle today is whether a road marking should be off-white or eggshell. Hard hats, hashtag FW de Klerk. Trying to put a little humorous spin on it. Ex-United FBOB says that awkward moment politicians are fighting outside of chambers over a road name change. DA says is reconciliatory, our thing. FW de Klerk Boulevard. I wouldn't say that, would one? Well, those are some of your views. Now we're going to take a different view. Yesterday, we were joined by former British ambassador to South Africa, Lord Robin Rennick, who shared some of his and Nelson Mandela's thoughts, he says, around F.W. de Klerk on this subject. Let's just take a look back at what Lord Rennick had to say.
Mandela was inclusive. He believed that every section of this community has to make its contribution to the country going forward and so on. That was his whole mantra. So one day he launched an attack on de Klerk, which was on behalf of the ANC, and I happened to be in Cape Town and I went to see him. And it was this little office in the townhouse, and I said, I used to walk in here with P.W. Botha and have to argue for people's lives. And by the way, he was never going to let you out of jail. And please remember that but for de Klerk, you might still be in jail. Mandela, of course, burst out laughing. You could say anything to Mandela. He never got annoyed. He burst out laughing, but then he said to me, "You're right," and he richly deserved his Nobel Peace Prize as well as me, because he made peace possible.
Well, that's a word from somebody who lived during that times and had interactions with both the revered leaders, really. And I think there ends our little take on the discussion. I'm sure it'll continue on social media. At SABC Newsroom is where you can send us your views on the emotive issue of renaming Table Bay Boulevard. Anyhow, the tweet of the day is one sent in by Eugene Visser, and it's on land ownership. If we look within the context of what's happening, foreigners not allowed to own land. How's that working for other countries is a question that Eugene Visser is asking on the issue of land ownership here in South Africa. Let's now take a look at front pages from around the globe. What's happening elsewhere in the world? In the United States, most papers are still focused on the snowstorm that has hit the northeast of the country. And here, the Boston Globe says it's a region put on pause. Then the Jerusalem Post is reporting today that 2 IDF soldiers have been killed and 7 others wounded in a strike in the Hezbollah region. Down under in Australia, the Daily Telegraph is reporting that a rare garden snail could delay the construction process of the Badgery Creek Airport. This as new green tape requirements have been put in place. I like the headline. It says snail's pace, only in Australia. Anyhow, before we go to an ad break, let's just have a look here at what else is happening across the country. Of course, in Pretoria, the capital, Mineral Resources Minister Rako Ramatlhori is expected to speak at a memorial service for former National Police Commissioner Jackie Silebi. That will be held at 5 p.m. at the Tshwane Event Centre today. Staying in Pretoria, a Metro Police officer will appear in the magistrate's court for allegedly threatening to shoot a 3-year-old girl. Then in Johannesburg, sentencing of Nyileti Sitole, convicted of abandoning her 16-month-old son on the side of the N1 highway, will take place in the Vereniging Magistrates Court. And we stay in the city of gold. Bafana Bafana's arrival press conference takes place at OR Tambo Airport today. That's the news. Are you going to go to the airport to give them a hero's welcome? I think they played very well and were maybe at times a little bit inexperienced and unlucky. Anyhow, what do I know? This is Newsroom. We'll be back after a short break. Welcome back. Shifting focus now to Nigeria, and Boko Haram is expected to top the agenda over the next 3 days at the African Union Summit in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. The militants have killed hundreds of people, if not thousands, displaced thousands others, and destroyed villages and towns in northeastern Nigeria. The South African government, meanwhile, has warned that all South Africans who are illegally engaged in military operations in Nigeria will be arrested. Newspapers have reported that some former South African soldiers are now training Nigerian troops to fight Boko Haram. Nigerian concerns have reached fever pitch as January draws to a close. Issues of violence and money are as expected, fueling some of these discussions. Elections in Nigeria have often been marred by violence. Now, taking a more in-depth look at the significance of the upcoming elections on February 14 and the impact it's having is Hamid Abubakar, who's the Director of Strategy and Communications Consultancy Africa Practice. He's live in Cape Town. Good morning to you, Hamid. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Evan. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you, today. I'm a bit worried about what's going in Nigeria. Elections around the corner. Are we going to see more bloodshed in the next couple of weeks?
Evan, we've been in a state of insecurity for a while now, for just over 4 years or so, since the previous administration, actually, the late Yar'Adua administration. And traditionally, we have seen a build-up of violence as elections comes closer, with it reaching a peak usually around the announcement of the electoral results. So I'm afraid that people are, of course, being very cautious, but people are also hoping for as peaceful an election as possible. The elections take place on February 14th. We will have to see how things go between now and then.
We've seen a lot of violence in the run-up to now, and probably see a little bit more. Do you think it's a safe enough environment for elections to go ahead? There have been calls for the elections to be postponed.
Yes, there have been renewed calls for the elections to be postponed for two reasons, primarily. The primary reason actually being that just about 38.7 million people have collected their voters' cards. We're running a new system, an electronic system this year, and that leaves about 30 million people who haven't actually collected their cards. So there's a bit of tension because people feel that just over half the electorate has actually collected their cards. The second thing is the issue of insecurity in the northeast states of the country, where we're actually looking at about 1 million people displaced, and so not being able to vote in their hometowns. And we're waiting for the National Assembly to pass a bill that will allow internally displaced people to actually vote. Security is going to make the electoral process very tricky for ordinary Nigerians and for the INEC, the independent body charged with administering elections. But INEC has repeatedly iterated that it has no plans of postponing the elections. And I think that there's an issue of credibility there. Being seen to postpone the elections might be interpreted as an independent party perhaps playing to one of the parties, in particular perhaps the ruling party, the PDP, the People's Democratic Party.
I want to talk about the background of what is going on in Nigeria, and then will this election have particular significance if it goes ahead this year?
Yes, I think that's a point that all analysts globally that are covering the elections agree. But I think that sometimes it's people forget that the type of tension that we're seeing and the fact that there's perhaps a viable opposition for the first time in recent since Nigeria's return to democracy suggests that this is actually a democratic process working, which is a positive thing. I think that these elections are going to be hotly contested. The APC that's the opposition party, has a genuine chance of actually unseating the People's Democratic Party, which is currently led by President Goodluck Jonathan. However, it is likely that the power of incumbency shall see the PDP retain its position, at least at the presidential level, but perhaps losing certain key states or regions to the opposition. So what we're seeing is a lot more vibrancy in terms of the elections, and perhaps a situation where Nigerians can come out and actually lay claim to the mandate in a democratic process and remind those that are being elected that they do actually work for the people. So I am trying to be upbeat about the elections and the potential impact. That said, regardless of who wins, chances are there will be a heightened level of instability and insecurity for the short term. But either way, I believe Nigeria is going to come out of this with a stronger democratic process in play.
Hamid, thank you very much for that contribution. You have a very good outlook. So the whole of the continent hopes that you are right with this positive outlook that you have ahead of the February 14 election. Thank you for joining us and giving us that unique insight. That is the Director of Strategy and Communications Consultancy Africa Practice. His name is Hamid Abubakar, and he spoke to us about, well, political stability or instability ahead of elections in Nigeria. Let's quickly have a look at some of your views on some of these topics at SABC Newsroom. Why Nigeria? It's amazing how the national debate in Nigeria has shifted from security to an election involving two uninspiring candidates, says Shet Guns. Naneka says, feeling some kind of way on the Nigeria front. Our country is burning, but business as usual, with a dash of anticipation in Lagos. That kind of hits to the heart of it. Febari Loading says, Nigeria belongs to all of us, and it's our collective responsibility to rise as electorates to make sure our votes count. Nigeria decides, of course, they decide on the 14th of February, Valentine's Day. We've had some real bad experiences on Valentine's Day as a country in South Africa. Let's hope it's a good omen this time around for our Nigerian brothers and sisters. Today's picture comes from Sonke. Captions, what do you do when this happens in your home? This was an Edenvale accident. Coming back from work thinking you want to cook, bath and rest. Well, Sonke, that was an interesting scenario that played out a little bit earlier. Nice picture. Now, there have been two frightening hijackings in the Gauteng area that have surfaced on the internet in the last couple of weeks. Now, in the most recent of these videos, cell phone footage shows a hijacking attempt outside a Pretoria nursery school conducted by what seems to be fake police officers. We seem to have a lot of those around. Now, to talk to us today about some of these hijacking trends and to give us a few tips on how you can stay safe and stay out of harm's way, we're joined by the Chief Operating Officer of Tracker here in South Africa, Mr. Ron Not Craig. Very good morning to you, sir.
Morning, Eben. Thank you for the opportunity.
I'm a little bit concerned. I suppose all people that are on social media are a little bit concerned when you see the kind of footage that we've seen doing the rounds. How do you guys view this kind of thing? And is it something that the public should heed and be a little bit more alert about?
Eben, we're very concerned about hijackings of this nature. And clearly the public should be educated and made as aware as possible of how to prevent being hijacked. These kind of incidents do happen from time to time. But we found that the hijackings that we've experienced from the statistics on the Tracker customer base, this is the exception rather than the norm.
Yeah, we see this kind of scenario playing itself out in traffic, in sort of broad daylight. Is this the basic method that's being used? It seems to be a very brazen scenario playing out, or is there other places where the public should be more alert? Should it maybe be in the home, the like?
Well, that is one method that they are using, and we encourage customers to be very aware of being distracted by passers-by, especially people that pass by on the passenger side of the vehicle. But from my experience, there are two main methods of hijacking. The one is hijacking that takes place in a residential driveway where the victim is boxed in by the vehicle of the hijacker. And the other is where vehicles are being hijacked by a vehicle which is marked as a law enforcement agency vehicle, or the occupants are dressed in a uniform of a law enforcement agency, and they pull these vehicles off the road and take the goods that are on board. They're normally high-value goods such as cell phones, smartphones, flat-screen TVs, and possibly cigarettes.
Yeah. I've got some statistics here that you provided us. It's a little bit worrying in its own. It says, of course, the driveways that you're talking about, 50% of hijackings take place there. But 80%, it says here, at shopping centres and over weekends. Is that a specific peak that people should be on the lookout for? It seems here in Gauteng especially, we live around our shopping centres. And suppose that's the soft underbelly of society that's been targeted.
Yes, indeed. please remember that these are the statistics that Tracker has. Our customer base is not necessarily representative of the South African car park. But we have found that up to 80% of vehicle theft incidents do take place at shopping centres, schools and social events. Yeah. So customers must be aware that when they go to a social event, for example, try and park your vehicle in a safe place to try and prevent your vehicle from being stolen.
We see a lot of warnings now when you drive into an ultra city, or that be aware of criminals. They use remote tracking devices and so forth. What other kinds of technology should people be on the lookout for, and how do you change your behavior to deal with that?
I don't quite understand the question here.
You know, remote locking devices that are being used. Is that problematic, that they jam your car and you can't lock your car?
Yes, they do. They use a normal gate remote, such as you and I would use to open or close our electrical gate at home. You see, those gate remotes work on a frequency within the public frequency spectrum, a selected spectrum. Very many of the vehicle remotes also work on a frequency within that public frequency spectrum. And so when you get out of your vehicle, before you actually lock your car or press the remote, the criminal will press the remote, and the radio frequency waves that are emitted interfere with the radio waves that are transmitted when you press your remote. As a result of that, your vehicle doesn't lock. The only way to avoid that is to make sure that once you try to lock your car, check the handle. And
check the handle, check the door. Yeah. Common sense must prevail at the end. I wanted to, without trying to be hysterical about it, which kind of neighborhoods are most at risk, not just here in Gauteng, but maybe if you can point at one or two others, so that people can be a little bit more aware of where and when they are?
Yeah, but that's a tough one. We obviously know from our statistics exactly where hijacking incidents are taking place. Yeah. But we don't just share that information. And there's good reason for that. Firstly, when we detect an increase in hijacking in certain areas, we focus on that area and deploy resources in order to try and catch the perpetrators. Furthermore, the syndicates target suburbs randomly. It really is a moving target. And what might be a higher risk area, if you like, or a higher risk suburb today, it isn't necessarily so tomorrow or the next week. So I think it's more important for the public to be aware of what they can do to prevent a hijacking rather than publishing this information on a daily basis.
This is what I'm hoping to conclude with. If you can, maybe a couple of general tips that you can give to the public out there to deal with this, but also to keep yourself generally safe.
Okay. We'd encourage the public to go to Tracker's website, www.tracker.co.za. We produced a video specifically to create awareness about safety regarding hijackings. Yeah. And a couple of tips there. Firstly, when you come home, get into homecoming mode, which means become aware, become vigilant when you enter into your neighborhood. Yeah. Switch off your cell phone if you can, switch off your radio, and become aware of what is happening around you. Generally, these hijackings, the residential ones where you get boxed in, they happen from about 4 o'clock in the afternoon till about 9 o'clock at night. Yeah. The customers are tired, they've had a long day at the office, and they're not as aware as they must be. Yeah. You actually have to force yourself physically to do it. And then when you approach your home, never turn into the driveway, stop in the road, open the gate, and then go inside. If you plan a quick stop at a convenience store or an ATM or whatever, be aware who's around you, because that's where they identify their potential victims and then follow you home. And then, of course, if you're being followed, there are one or two things that you can do to try and put the hijackers off. Simply adjusting your rear view mirror or looking over your shoulder is enough normally to put the hijackers off. Yeah. Alternatively, you can press and hold your hooter. That's the last thing they want, is to attract attention to themselves. Yeah. And those are just some of the things that you can do to keep yourself safe and prevent being hijacked.
So common sense must prevail.
Always, Urban.
Thank you.
There's no substitute for that.
Thank you for coming in and telling us what's going on. At times, it can be lonely out there and it feels very dangerous. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Urban.
That's the Chief Operating Officer of Tracker South Africa, Mr. Ron Not-Craig, joining us here today. You're watching Newsroom. Time for us to take a short commercial break.
is a personal expression that evokes a flame from within.
Street art, it's a vast concept.
Dancing is one of the main art forms on the streets of Africa. Regardless of how it is done, the streets remain expressive. A passionate artist in the central business district of Johannesburg.
Yeah, I've been doing this it's been 7 years or 8 years now.
Brains lost control on what to do then. Words dispute in the mouth of a woman.
That's Kaleidoscope, Sundays, 5:30 p.m. on SABC News.
Well, hello and welcome back here with Newsroom on SABC News. Let's just take a look at the top stories this morning. A 30-year-old Gugulethu man believed to be linked to a series of rapes and murders in the Cape Peninsula is due to appear in the Goodwood Magistrates Court today. This after the bodies of several women were found near Century City train station last year. Police are investigating a possible link with all the bodies. The bodies of 6 women have been discovered separately in the area over the past few months, leading to fears about a serial killer operating in the area. Most of the bodies were found naked and their hands tied behind their backs. South African government has warned all South Africans who are illegally engaged in military operations in Nigeria that they will be arrested. Newspapers have reported that some former South African soldiers are training the Nigerian troops to fight Boko Haram. Speaking on the sidelines of the AU summit, Defence Minister Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula says all mercenaries will be severely dealt with. And Hashim Amla and Riley Rousseau smashed quick fire centuries as South Africa crushed the West Indies by 131 runs in a rain-affected 5th and final one-day international. The match was reduced to 42 overs because of rain, and South Africa scored a massive 361 for 5. The pair put on 247 for the 3rd wicket, equaling the South African record that they had set in the 2nd match of the series. And remember, all those top stories and more are all available on our Newsroom Facebook page. You can then also keep up to date on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Kevin, back to you.
Thank you very much, Katrine. Now, some 4.5 million people were severely affected by a U.S. blizzard that swept past New York City on Tuesday and Wednesday this week. Meanwhile, flash floods caused by torrential downpours has swept away roads, bridges, destroyed tens of thousands of hectares of crops in the southern parts of Malawi and elsewhere in southern Africa. These are but a few of the natural disasters associated with climate change in the last month alone. Now, Paul Tsietsemonare is here again to talk to us about both the environmental and economic impacts of climate change. Paul, good morning.
Very good morning.
Are you concerned? Are you concerned about this?
Very. That's why I keep bringing this subject up so many times. We can never get over it. It's a very, very concerning factor. Already from the intro, you saw the blizzard in New York as well as other states in America. And then also the flooding that we had over southern Africa, especially the southern part of Malawi, some parts of Mozambique. I mean, those calls for concern, serious, serious concern.
Will it get worse now as we go on for the next couple of years?
Yeah, basically so. It looks like that's the trend that we're going into now, that these storms are getting more and more severe. I mean, if you look at some of the stats, 2001 to 2004 were some of the hottest recorded years worldwide, not just in one place, worldwide, since back in the 1860s, and in 2013, 2014, really, really hot weather that we recorded in some parts of Northern Europe and also Southern Europe. Yeah, this is just the blizzards that we saw in just overseas.
The reverse is then true. You see these warm periods, but then you see extreme cold and extreme weather like this.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Snow in the Middle East.
Yeah, that's the thing about climate models is that, if they're accurate, what we'll be seeing is that there'll be an increase in severe events, like the flooding, like the storms, and some of it could also, develop in new areas which were not expected before. Yeah. And that's just basically what is happening. I mean, we've seen tropical storms increasing and in terms of severity as well as duration over 50% since as early as 1980. So, it's getting worse.
We don't seem to heed even lives lost, but economic impact is something that we understand and we respond to that on this planet. Talk about the economic impact of these scenarios as they're playing out?
Yeah, as climate change science has been going, people have been trying to put a price tag on what is happening. Now, of course, we cannot forget that, or we cannot overlook human life loss. I mean, let's just take the 2004 Asian tsunami that hit there.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about it, lots of people lost their lives during that time. But that year alone, or that period alone, December month and January alone, that took over $10 billion to recover from that. You know?
Yeah.
And that's what's been happening. The United States have been reporting since as early as the 1930s or 1940s. They've been paying around $3.6 billion a year on disasters. Yeah. But now they're paying a whole lot more. In 2004 alone was $145 billion spent on natural disasters.
That's incredible.
Yeah. This is just the spending on fires. Yeah.
This is the real cost of it. It's one thing to see it up on graphs, and for us lay people, it doesn't really make sense, Paul. We have to find a way that we can all contribute and that we can all do something in our daily lives to deal with climate change, because climate change is causing all of these disasters. Yeah. Me at my home, what can I do tomorrow to help to make it better? And what can everyone that's watching do tomorrow to make it better? Before
we jump into what we should do, the strategies we should do, I just want to pick up on something very important that you said. It's nice to see it on graphs, nice to see, but how does it really affect us? Now think about if a country has a budget, let's say hypothetically $150 billion to spend on education and housing and unemployment and so forth. And then bam, come climate change, and it needs up to $90 billion just to deal with that. So how do we deal with all of those problems? See, that's how deep this situation goes into. But, for anybody at home, what we can all do, start saving. This is something that I read recently, which was quite of a different tune. Instead of just picking up the papers and not using a lot of, electricity, start saving for reinvestment or reinsurance on if climate change hits your area. There's a big Munich Re, it's a big insurance company in Germany, and they're dealing with helping people put money away for in case of a natural disaster, and not just rely on your insurance that will tell you, hey, we don't cover natural disasters.
Act of God is what they call it.
Exactly.
Act of God. Acts of God are not covered in insurance
Lightning
policies,
strikes,
fortunately.
Yeah. The small print that we never see.
Paul, thank you for joining us. It's important for all of us to make a contribution in dealing with climate change, because our climate is changing and the world is changing. It's affecting all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Quick look at, what's our tweets at the moment. I think it might be the Proteas after their wonderful win yesterday. Of course, they're going to the World Cup. Congratulations, Wayne Parnell, on your incredible bowling spell. Hard work paying off, says Aisha. Obviously a Parnell fan we have there, but good job. 4 for 42 last night. David Miller says, what a solid series it was for us. A lot of outstanding performances, up early to catch a 6 a.m. flight back home. Well, David Miller, outstanding performer. Got 130 in one game and looked the part. Another big 100 for Run Machine. Amla Hash, what a great player. Well played. Buddy, have a bright future ahead. He has a bright future behind him. A great Hash. Hashim Amla, have done it again. You're a Run Machine. Yes, he's right up there. Aman. Everybody loves a winner, especially here in South Africa. Now, we conclude with a winning app, an innovative, travel app is now available in Africa and is increasingly conquering the international market. Ring Credible, remember that, is a new resourceful traveling app that eliminates roaming charges as it relies on an internet connection. Ring Credible is gaining momentum, especially in Europe, North and South America, as well as here on the continent now. In just 2 years of existence, the app has achieved 2.9 million subscribers in 159 different countries and been ranked the #1 travel app globally on Apple devices. Now, to tell us all the final details is Ring Credible representative in Africa, Dean Hine. Just briefly, and in layman's terms, explain to us how does the app work.
Good morning, Ivan. The app purely allows you to make calls over some sort of internet connectivity. So it uses the traditional voice over IP technology, which is now being used on mobile telephones. So what we then have is that we then have an app that you can call a specific country, and your tariff is based on the country of destination of the call, not where you're calling from. So you can call from anywhere in the world. The tariff is only based on where you are calling, the destination of that. And
this must be finding favor with quite a lot of people. How does it work on the continent where at times our connectivity is not the best?
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the the biggest challenges we will have in Africa in terms of the connectivity that we have. But I mean, with a lot of infrastructure development that's happening across the continent, because of the reliability on Wi-Fi as well, that it can work on Wi-Fi, it's such that, with a lot of the infrastructure development that's happening, we will obviously be able to piggyback on that to use this a little bit more efficiently in Africa and going forward.
Tell us about the profile of your ideal user or of the people using your app globally right now.
Well, I think the fact that it's called the number one travel app meant that the target market initially was around your normal travelers within Europe that travel within the European Union countries and obviously within the continents. But I think the dynamics have changed a little bit now. I think there's a lot of businesses that do a lot of international business dealings. So there's calls that they need to make for international purposes as well. So it's purely somebody who's mobile and actually has a lot of international calls that they need to do, whether it be business or family overseas, or just to whatever reasons that can be in terms of your travels, or just calling the loved ones overseas as well. That is the kind of typical profile of somebody that uses the app.
What about business, small business? We're very passionate about small business now in South Africa. How will this kind of app add value to small and even at some point medium business going forward?
I think the biggest challenge globally has always been roaming charges when you're calling overseas. And I think for small businesses, that obviously makes sure that the tariffs in terms of the costs of calling overseas is cut quite significantly. If I can give you an example, our tariffs for calling to some of the popular destinations like China is as little as 20 cents a minute, and the United States. So there's a lot of cost cutting in terms of communications for small and medium enterprises as well.
Gone are those 45,000 Rand bills when you come back from overseas. Just tell us quickly, how can one download your app?
It's available on both the Apple Store and the Play Store. You can also download it from ringcredible.co.za. And on download, we allocate what we call a free gift. So you have 3 minutes to actually test the call and see how the quality of the call. And if you are having any technical issues, you can also get hold of us on the support tab within the app itself, where we can actually assist you in making sure that you can actually start using the phone.
And how have you guys started here in South Africa? You've been started with a bang?
We're getting there. I think the biggest challenge obviously is getting it out there, which is what we're currently doing. I think we started in December, and there has been quite a big uptake in terms of a lot of people that are traveling, and specifically around the European countries. Because the tariffs there are quite reasonably cheap as compared to the African market at the moment.
And also broadband penetration is so widespread that it's quite easy to use. Well, thank you very much for coming. Is it Hoon or Hein?
It's Hine.
Yeah. Well, Dean, there now I've learned something as well today. Thanks for joining us today. It's an incredible app. It will make your life a lot cheaper when you travel overseas, if you do for business or pleasure. Either way, no more 40,000 Rand bills when you come back roaming and having called and been on Facebook. Most expensive Facebook you'll ever do is overseas. Thank you very much, Dean, for joining us. That's where we wrap today. Newsroom, of course, broadcast live from our studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg, every weekday morning between 9 and 10 a.m. The show repeats at 2 in the afternoon. The rebroadcast is at 5 a.m. the following morning. We're also live on YouTube right now during this period, but you can watch the show back on demand on our YouTube channel that's up all the time. This is SABC News. You've been watching Newsroom. We love it. Good morning.